Okay, so today I'm interviewing Robbie Travers. He's somebody I had a few ding-dongs with on Twitter, and I consider him to be on the gender critical side of the spectrum, maybe sometimes a bit right-wing. I don't know if he agrees with that. But, Robbie, you introduce yourself and what your political sort of situation is.
Well, actually, I think that's a really good introduction in some ways because I think that we've got two things to discuss there. We have what does gender critical really mean,
Hmm.
and I think on that it's a really interesting topic because I think you'll agree more than I. Gender critical means really anything.
Yeah.
Frankly, it is a collective term for essentially what was one position that is individuals who don't believe you can change sex.
Hmm.
Now, on that basis, it encompasses people from far left, far right. So, for
Oh, yeah.
example, Matt Walsh and Ben Shapiro are being lumped in with radical communist theorists who also
Well, it's a bit of a
think that.
horseshoe, isn't it? Of like, that you get you
Yeah,
when you go far enough right, you get to like, you know what I mean?
but this is the problem with it, Frida. When you're sitting there and you're looking at this label of GC doesn't really describe anything beyond people who don't believe you can change sex,
Right.
which is a real problem. Now, obviously, that comes from a legal position in the UK where people lobbied to have this as a protected belief
Mm.
under the Equalities Act. So that's where this comes from in many ways, idea of gender critical. But I think that gender critical, I wouldn't necessarily even describe myself as gender critical. I don't blame you for calling me that because you see it all the time. But I wouldn't necessarily describe myself as that because I don't think that that actually reveals anything about
Mm.
me beyond I hold one position that people, for example, like Ben Shapiro, but also people like Julie Bindel or Kathleen
Mm. But would
Stockhold.
you consider yourself so being a gay man? I think I've got that right. Would you say you sort of say gay, not queer? Because I've seen gay men say that, and I
Yeah,
think, well, because so
I
what is it about that queer and LGBTQ that you disagree with? What is it about that? And do you think it diminishes the rights of gay people?
Well, okay, so from a fundamental perspective, I think you have to examine what is queer,
Mm.
Frida. And queer is a term that is used, but what does it communicate? And this is
Mm.
my real issue. So I would say I'm bi, not queer, and I would say that on a specific note
Right.
because if I
Sorry.
no apology needed there. But what I'm saying is, if I was to say to you, for example, I'm queer, what do I communicate to you? Well, I communicate nothing about my sex. I communicate nothing about my gender identity,
Right.
or I don't personally believe I have one, but we'll just go with this. I believe nothing. It doesn't communicate anything about my sexuality. It doesn't communicate anything, and I think part of the problem here is that I believe words have meaning, and I believe that
Right.
essentially to have a communicate for us to have this dialogue, we need to have an understanding of terms that we can agree upon. And I think for on that basis, queer doesn't actually have much meaning, and I think that becomes a problem.
Well, the way I see it is the reason that queer and trans is included in that acronym is because when people socialize in those spaces that are,
Mm-hmm.
traditionally would have been gay clubs, gay clubbing events, these things intersect. And when people look at hate crimes and the kind of political wrangling that goes on, and it's like the kind of if hate is directed at us from cis people and people that they judge you based on how you look, basically. And I think that's why that is included because it recognizes that when we socialize together and there are like pride events,
Mm-hmm.
that is an inclusive event. So, you got the Pride Progress flag that includes ethnic minorities because we recognize that they're suffering the same hate crimes. It's coming from the same kind of intolerance. And I think that's why they're represented. I don't think it's got anything to do because if you say, well, it's based on sex, and nobody communicates with sex straight away. Because the way I always say to it, like when like the way I talk to, sometimes I'll talk to somebody who's quite young and I'll say, well, sex is your hardware and gender is your software, and you don't communicate with someone sex straight away. You look at somebody and and because of we're sensory beings as human beings, we look at each other and we make certain value judgments about them based on her. I'm sure you might have had people comment on the way you look, Robbie, and say, You know, you're a certain kind of man because you have long hair. I'm not saying they're going to hate you for that. I'm not saying that. But what I'm saying, that's how we look at each other as, you know.
Well, actually, interestingly, just to kind of interject there, I mean, there's a few things I want to come on to, but I'll let you go. But actually, I've been quite recently told quite a lot of the time I'm a woman because I have longer hair.
Well, I think you could be quite a pretty woman, actually.
Well, I'll never. I mean, I'll never be one, but I'll take the compliment. The point is that when it comes down to it, I find that quite interesting because, from my perspective, I think there's because I think when we discussed this earlier, and you know the topics, I think we discussed what do gender critical people have in common with, I say gender critical just as a term, and trans activists. What do we have in common? I think we actually mostly, in many cases, come from a similar position, which is that we are very sick of what I would call sex stereotypes, which people might call gender roles. Both positions.
So do you think that I embody a stereotype because the way I want to present myself, like, look, like I've got my eyebrows done, I've got my hair, so there are certain signs of.
Well, the thing is, I don't necessarily care about how you look, and in the most warm possible way, I don't care how you look.
Yeah, but what I'm saying is, some people might, because I've heard this phrase "woman face," like I'm doing woman face, but. I know cis women. I've got cis friends who they don't look like this when they wake up in the morning. They put it's something they do to themselves because they want to. It's confidence. Maybe it's something they want to, communicate to the world. And I think that's the way I look at it.
I mean, it's up to individual people to dress and obviously look how they want to look, and that's up to them. My problem comes when I think what happens is people start assigning gender roles to appearance, which I think becomes a problem. So for me, for example, I have been told multiple times, "Oh, you're female. Oh, you're feminine. Oh, you're a trans woman." I go, "No, I'm not." And they go, "But you look like one."
I wouldn't say you were trans. Well, there are plenty women I know that are very butch and very masculine, but they're very happy to be women. It's like
you see, this is the thing, and this is where I think the divide starts, because I'm not accusing all individuals on the other side of the argument of saying this, but I think it is not necessarily uncommon. I think the problem is that from my perspective, when you have sex, I think sex is the meaningful metric here. So I essentially feel that is a meaningful metric which we cannot escape, and which I don't think you can change in any way.
So when it comes to the idea of, like, I mean, it used to be said that transsexuals change sex. I mean, I know what my biology is. I'm not completely mental. Do you know what I mean? I know that my innards, natal body, whatever was born as, I'd have to modify that to be, but even then, that I'm a complete person now. It doesn't matter what I do to my body doesn't change who I am. But I think one of the problems, that Dr. Winston thing where he says you can't change your sex, it's in every cell of your body. I mean, that kind of ignores the kind of, the philosophical, the psychological, the endocrinological, and I think there's a missing link between all these things in which trans people fit. Now, there's no language that's sufficient, I think, that works for that. I just think that's a problem of, I'm quite happy for if somebody says to me, you can't change, so I'm not trying to change my sex. What I am is what I am, and I've just happened to be born a certain way. And when I was growing up, and the puberty I went through felt alien to me. And and I know when I'm saying this stuff, it's very difficult for me to make a scientific basis for it. But I don't fully understand my own experience. Just because we're trans don't mean that we fully understand our own experience. It's just we struggle around with these words and we fumble around with meaning. And some people will attach themselves to this idea of born in the wrong body because it makes sense to them. But I think
that's been privately between you. Well, not privately, but between you and I think that's been a catastrophe for the opposing side, or that side of the argument. I think born in the wrong body has been an opposing.
but surely you can understand as like a sort of in a sort of childish way almost. But we're all, but my because I
think it's about discomfort, and people feel deep-seated discomfort with who they are, and I totally empathize with that. And I think that that's actually something that needs to be examined at a massive level in terms of not just the dysphoria that you might see, people face, but also, at a deeper level, we have a lot of people who feel deeply dysphoric about their body. Now, that's something really important to look at, analyze, and you'll know that as well as I do. I think the issue here is, from the other perspective, is whilst I totally accept that and totally agree, that these people need serious psychological assessment help.
So you think it's just purely should be assessed psychologically, because I do see a psychiatrist, I see a psychologist every few months, and they review what I feel. But I think everybody could do with that. I don't think that is specific. Like I think what it is for me is like since I came out as trans, I've had access to counselling, to blood tests, to more medical intervention that has helped me as a person than I would have any other time. And I think there's a lot of people out there that could do with that. And it's not necessarily because they're trans. It's like when you start to talk about who you are as a person, and these complex ideas of the self and how we perform ourselves in society, I think it's good to talk about those things. Now, whether you decide to transition or not is separate to that. Whereas I did, I was once Freddie and then I changed my name, and now I feel more confident, but I don't know why that is. I don't necessarily need to know why that is. That's who I am now. And most people,
to be completely fair to you, all power to you if you feel more confident but the way you present.
Yeah, see, the problem I have, Robbie, is I know, like I have to mention it because it'd be weird if I didn't. But
go for it.
You do these chat spaces where you kind of host. Some of the people in there, they're very venomous, and they have they've kind of made people like me an enemy in their mind, and I don't know why that is. I don't know why they're focused on trans people as a kind of enemy. And I know some people have had trauma in their lives and perhaps gone through I don't want to get into what people have personal trauma, but I can kind of sometimes understand why they might be tricked into thinking that this, because it's a simple narrative. It's like this idea that there's a set of people in society that are the answer to all your problems, and or there's a set of people who are the reason for all your problems, and that's what you've created in some of those spaces where people can talk openly, because on Twitter, it's a pretty much like a sort of it's a hate sphere sometimes, and I would say that you've encouraged a bit of that by opening that space to certain people. How would you feel about that? I mean,
so how I would answer that is that I think that in actually a lot of these spaces, what you're seeing is people presenting arguments. And I think that sometimes the arguments are less coherent, because we have to bear in mind that not everyone is incredibly eloquent. Not everyone has had a full gold star education. And I think that's key to know. I think also there's a lot of frustration. And the reason why I think the frustration is built has been the no debate. And I think the policy of no debate that's been implemented by multiple LGBT organizations have pushed it, has meant that people feel frustrated because they've raised serious concerns about the provision of single-sex spaces, for example, and these issues. And people have been shut down repeatedly. People have been pressured into losing their jobs. Now, I'll say openly, I don't think anyone should be losing their job for their opinions on this.
Well, nobody loses a job for their opinion, Robbie. They lose the job because they're making a problem for a specific person. Like if I'm in a situation like at work and somebody says, I can't work with you, Frida, because you're trans, that's not my problem. That's a problem for my employer and that person, because they have no
Okay, so here's the question. What happens when it's an individual external to these organizations? Again, also as well, what would happen if you see multiple individuals now who are being told that I've seen multiple reports of individuals for supporting drag queens in their personal life are now being reported because they support or have friendships with drag queens to their employers. And I say to that, no, I think it's fundamentally wrong to go reporting people to their employers for their views. And I also think that I think it's wrong.
I don't personally. I think I'm somebody that's very libertarian. I think if free speech is free, it should be free. But we don't live in a world of level playing fields with free speech. Certain people have more free speech than others. And if you're an employee of an organization and you're quite a low, you've just started somewhere and you find yourself on the bottom rung of an organization, and you need to, if you're a trans person, you need to know you're going to be supported if you express that and not be because I
agree, and I totally agree with that. I think you're absolutely right. I think if you express your gender in any way, you should not absolutely be sacked for that. But I think it equally comes to the position of, well, would you want to, for example, say that, well, you don't believe that there is such a thing as gender identity? I personally don't feel that there is. I don't have one.
No, but that would be fine, because we could have that conversation, but it doesn't mean that you look at me and you can't work with me. But there are some people, and it comes down to this idea that, there are people out there that think people have been fired for saying a trans woman is a man. And that's not the reason they've been fired. It's because they've been constantly doing that and causing a problem for somebody. And
I think we have to,
and that comes down to bullying. It's not about your opinion.
I think we have to be careful here. I think there have been instances that I've seen, and especially when we look at Forstater and Bailey.
Oh, Forstater. The thing that bothers me about Forstater is she wasn't fired. She just didn't have she wasn't recruited.
She didn't have her contract renewed, which is how to put it.
And her whole mission, it's like she's got this massive chip on her shoulder, and it's like her website Sex Matters, right? Yes, yeah. Sex matters, but what she wants to say is gender doesn't matter, and it would be more honest of her if she were to say that.
I don't think that's necessarily exclusive, Frida. Right. I think that what she's saying is sex matters as the primary characteristic more than gender. Well, I think that's a fair comment.
I would accept that in certain circumstances, because that's why they dwell on there's three main arguments, isn't there? The arguments about prisons, the arguments about sports, and the arguments about certain single-sex spaces where women may be vulnerable. Now, the reason they use those arguments is because they're performative arguments, because within those arguments you can stand on a soapbox and say those things, and they make sense to people, because there are instances in sport, like, say, the Fallon Fox case. You can make a case that says Fallon Fox should not have been fighting cis women, right? And not just because she was trans, because she was just beating the fuck out of them, right? That shouldn't have happened. And there's instances in prisons where you've got somebody like, was it Karen White? Karen White?
Karen White. There's multiple, but Karen White's the main one that's focused on. This is
the one that comes up, and she was responsible for 3 or 4 sexual assaults in prison.
5. It was 5 sexual assaults, 3 of inmates, 2 of prison staff. Right. But
So this comes up constantly. And then you've got the idea of, the Sarah Summers case with the single sex space. So these are isolated. It's incidents that should not be allowed, in my opinion, to escalate. But because of people like Maya Forstater and Helen Joyce, they don't care about the outcomes for those people, but they will happily use those instances to make trans women specifically in wider culture seem like a threat. It's all about making us seem like a threat, and that's the problem I have with it. Because when you read Ellen Joyce's book, I've read it. When you read Kathleen Stock's book, it's a bunch of morally duplicitous arguments that are made to make trans women feel like a threat to society, which we're not.
Can I just ask you why you feel they're morally duplicitous? So I want to understand more about where you're coming from.
So when say Helen Joyce, she talks about fetishism and the idea of what we call, is it AGP?
Autogynephilia, yeah.
Yeah. Now that exists. We know that exists, but it's not a problem. It's not a problem. They like the idea that the philia is the prefix because it gives this kind of a threat. But, they have this puritanism and this kind of moral judgmentalism about what it is to be fetishistic, and I don't buy that. I don't think you should be shaming people. If people want to do that, then yeah, it might be weird. It might be a bit, skirt goes spinny, whatever. But it's not a threat to it. There are websites, right, that dedicate themselves to finding the worst pictures of trans people possible. You know what? Somebody ripped some of my pictures from a dating site, right? And I know this personally, and they try to humiliate me by posting pictures of me and saying this person is a pervert. Right? I'm not a pervert. I just, I've got a sexual side to me and it's private. And if I want to share it on wherever, it's my choice to do that. It's not your choice to make me feel shamed for that. And that's what those people are doing.
I mean, I would firstly say that I think that there's a questionable element about calling someone something like a deviant or a paedophile without any legal basis.
This is what happens to trans women on Twitter and on social media. We get associated with sexual predators.
I think what I would say though is, and I actually agree with Helen Joyce on this. There's a risk calculation that has to be made for prisons and for hospitals, and the input that Helen is putting in is that of sex, because what we are not saying is that all people who transition or identify as a trans woman are predators. What Helen Joyce is saying is that she believes that, and I think that there is evidence that clearly backs this up, backing Helen on this, that individuals are offending at a same rate according to their sex rather than their gender that they identify with. So I think what Helen is essentially saying there is that you have individuals who are actually, they are offending with the same offending pattern that you have regarding male individuals. Now, I think the other thing that you have to consider is that you also have a great deal of individuals in prisons who are just identifying as trans women. Now, I think you probably may agree with this.
I agree that there are men out there prison is a brutal place. I've spoke to people that have been in prison. I spoke to trans women that have been in prison, and a lot of men, if they thought they could get an easier ride, would, but it's not good. When you go to prison, you don't gain rights, you lose rights. You don't become absolutely anymore.
But some prisons, people find harder than others, as you will be well aware. I think the problem here.
Let me just say, Robbie, at the moment we're talking about something that neither of us are really qualified, because we don't work in prisons. I've never studied the prison population. I know that prisons are tough places, but when I said performative argument before, this is what I'm talking about. This is what Helen Joyce uses. This is what Maya Forstater uses, because they know most people don't know about prisons, and when you see people with keep prisons single sex in their Twitter profiles, they don't give a toss about women in prison. And
I don't necessarily agree with that, because I know actually I've been very lucky on Twitter to meet several women who have actually been to prison or worked in prisons, who've actually told me. I sat down and listened to them about it, and all I would say to you is the problem is when you have individuals sitting there say, and this is what I think really is a weak point. I totally agree that perhaps some people don't necessarily care about prisoners. I will totally accept that and concede that some people might not. What I do think is that when you have individuals who are essentially identifying as female in prisons for an easier ride, to be able to get out of that male prison, etc. The problem is when you say acceptance without exception, and everyone has to be accepted for the claims they make regarding their gender identity, you end up in a very interesting place, Frida, where when you're examining this, at what point do you draw a line? How can we tell what a genuine transgender woman is?
Well, that is a problem, and I would agree with that. But what I'm saying is that from what I can tell, from what I can surmise from reading Helen Joyce, she's not interested in women's prisons. She's interested in creating an argument which makes trans women seem like a threat to society. And one of the ways into that is by looking at that, and it's also by looking at sports, and it's also by looking at. Let's talk.
I don't think it's a claim about they're a threat to society.
Like
I think
we know Helen Joyce is on record as saying that trans women are a problem to a sane society or sane world. And what I would say to that is, what world is she in? We don't live in a sane world.
No, we don't. I actually agree with you there. We don't live in a sane world, but I think part of the problem with what I actually in some ways think that the concept of transgenderism itself poses severe problems, because I think that there's something here when you talked about Robert Winston and essentially said that's taking a biological view to it. Now I slightly disagree with you. I think there is an endocrinological truth to it. Sorry, we got there in the end. But you've got those two elements in which I don't think it's fun. I think you can obviously fiddle with your endocrine system, but that doesn't change your sex, which is a problem.
You see, when I discuss these things, I've got to sort of remove, like, I've got to be distant from the argument sometimes, because if I'm speaking as a trans woman, a trans person, I'm very defensive. I'm thinking, well, because I feel like I'm being personally attacked sometimes, and that's wrong, because I'm not being necessarily personally attacked by some, but I can understand why these things escalate on Twitter, because if you're somebody that's going through a transition process, and you're very psychologically vulnerable. Like, I'm pretty tough, and I'm a gobby cow, and not many people are like me. And this is why I have a lot of problems with perhaps other trans people on Twitter, because I've slipped up, and I've been tone policed, basically the same. But I'm always who I am, right? Whatever that is. But I feel like people like Kathleen Stark, Helen Joyce, Maya Forstater, they are very, very one-dimensional in their approach to this. I'd say Julie Bindel, I'd say Andrew Doyle, Joe Bartok as well. I just find these people to be very one-dimensional, very dogmatic in their opinions. Would you agree with that? Would you say?
I mean, I think the one, as I think, to quote Christopher Hitchens, who I love and adore in many ways, I think what one he said is the only problem with fundamentalism is the fundamentals if they're wrong.
Yeah,
and I think
I just say I did used to love listening to Christopher Hitchens, but I think if you brought Christopher, like, God bless his soul, but if you could bring Christopher Hitchens into now, it'd be interesting to.
I think he'd reprimand you for saying God bless his soul, but aside from that, but no, I really, but I really do think here part of the problem of why there's I think there is common ground. I think we both get to that certain part where we go, okay, so gender role, but if we take, I think it's really important to take this kind of route that we both kind of have this perspective. You go from, okay, we both don't think that someone should be limited to a gender role or sex stereotype by their birth sex. I think we both agree on that.
But I would say that if you're going to start discriminating people on the basis of the way they look, right? It's like when I'm at work, when I'm in social life, it's just natural for me. My pronouns are she, people call me miss, whatever it is. But I never enforce that. There's this idea that trans women are dictating what people should say or do, but that never happens. I
think I'll give you credit, because I don't think I've genuinely seen you've never enforced pronouns or usage of pronouns or demanded people call you something. I think that's one of the biggest problems here. For me, I think the biggest problem with pronouns is that this moves into compulsory speech territory, and it's demanding people. I think there is elements of this. I think it moves into territory where you have to say something that you might fundamentally disagree with, and I think that's morally wrong, actually, personally.
Okay, so
and I think that goes both ways, though, because I think that if you want to claim, no, go Frida.
I can give you an example of this, because, like, in my work, we had a day it was sort of a trans and non-binary inclusion thing because I worked with the LGBT Foundation, and through my employer we had let's announce our pronouns, and I was like, well, the problem with this is there might be somebody that doesn't want to announce that.
Absolutely.
And it might be because they're not come out yet as, you know what I mean? It's like, it's a bit of a grey.
And also just to kind of, obviously, I'm sex stereotype non-conforming. I mean, I think that's pretty obvious, but, I have been asked my pronouns by people who are actually mocking me for my sexuality a lot of the time.
Well, I would...
And I think and this is something that people go, well, what are your pronouns? And it's often, I've had this quite a lot from trans activists, and obviously I don't care for names or naming people, but I've had quite a lot of them say, oh, well, what are your pronouns? I can't tell what your pronouns are. And I go, it's very interesting. I mean, I'll actually, there was a DM I got where someone said, I don't know what your pronouns are. Are you a boy or girl? Pick one.
Hmm.
And I thought, well, that's an interesting position, because for me, I came into this saying, I view gender roles or sex stereotype roles, which I prefer, I view them as chains. And I think this is just my personal view. And I think that people should not be glad of their chains. And now, if you want to be a certain way, be that way. So if you want to look how you want to do, if you want to dress how you want to do, that's absolutely fine. I think the problem for me comes when people start saying, firstly, that sex stereotype that you are embodying changes material reality, or that secondly, that, I am anything less male because I'm not what they traditionally view. And I know that you're not saying that. So just to be quite clear, you've never said that. And that's not something I would accuse you of. But I think it's very endemic.
These things change culturally on a timeline. Like if you look into like the past of, like, if you look at Greek mythology and think like boys, there was the idea of the androgyne, the idea of like it was kind of accepted. It's kind of like there are a spectrum of femininity and masculinity, but I think one of the problems people have with it is they think being trans is a modern invention, like because of the medical side of it, and I don't necessarily think that's true. I think that the medical is like, the treatment of cancer is pretty recent. It doesn't mean that people didn't want to seek. So,
well, I mean, what do we mean by being trans? I think that's a really important question to answer here, because I take your point. I mean, gender diverse people or people who are non-conforming to sex stereotypes are not new. I mean, obviously, there's been elements of persecution throughout history of that. We both know that. But what do we mean by being trans? Because I think that's really at the core of the disagreement. Yeah.
Yeah. So are you asking me how I feel?
Yeah, absolutely.
So what do I define as being trans? You see, I don't really. I mean, I don't announce myself in social life. I'm trans, but I know that there are certain codes and there are certain, semantics around how I describe myself, and I don't necessarily invent those. They're coming out, like the word trans comes out of academia. Like cis and trans. They're like, are they Latin? I don't know, but they are the words that we've adopted because it kind of we kind of assume it makes some kind of sense. But whatever I am, there has to be some words for that. Do you know what I mean?
No, I totally agree with you, and this is coming back to words have meaning, and we need words that we can commonly understand.
There's sometimes a linguistic trick that some people play and say, "What is a woman?" And I said, well, I don't come into rooms and announce myself as a woman, but there are certain societal and semantics, and people just associate me. Like even when I was as young as I can remember, I was called, feminine, and it was almost a derogatory thing where I was called a girl when I was at school.
I think that's really actually derogatory, and I would also say it's homophobic. And I'm sorry you experienced that.
No, it's fine. But see, I went to a school where I was taught by nuns. It was boys and girls were very much separated. So girls' play was separate, and boys' play was a different thing. And they thought that boys and girls had different brains. So I kind of challenged that quite early. I'd say to the teacher, "Well, can I not play with the girls? I like the girls' company more." And I don't know why that was. I don't know what was the motivator for that. But They said
And
no.
a lot of sex stereotype non-conforming boys and gay boys or more feminine boys are like that, and I totally understand that.
But for a long time, Robbie, I was a gay boy, and I was a bit of a when I first started to sort of go out in Manchester, I was a bit of a drag queen. But I didn't. The kind of men that I liked weren't the kind of men that were attracted to gay boys, and that was part of my psychology.
But that's interesting because I think that's actually something that's quite common with a lot of homosexual male people, because I think when you see quite a lot of them, they want what they can't have. Quite a lot of them, for example, if you look at elements of Twitter, looking at Mason Mount, for example, and other gay men who are, repeatedly, and they say, gay men say, "Oh, I love them, I love them." It's about wanting what you can't have.
Yeah,
I would.
So
go ahead, Frida.
Some of my way of performing my gender was to get the men that I wanted. Do you know what I mean? It was like I knew what I had to do to have that experience that I wanted. Do you know what I mean? I don't know if you've.
But I think so. I've never experienced that because I've never had that kind of same position. So I'm not going to comment on your position. All I would ask you from such a position is, in terms of that, I'm not sure necessarily what, from my personal view, that changes about your sex or gender. That just is you wanting to express yourself in a certain way to attract a certain sort of person, which I think that's something that's based on sexuality. Now, I'm not saying you're not entitled to do that. Just to be very clear, I'm not saying that. But what I am saying is that doesn't seem to me to change the material reality of sex.
Yeah, but the reason I say that is because some sort of gender critical people say that people become trans because they can't handle themselves as gay, or that the society is saying that, you'd be better being a woman than being a gay boy. But I never felt that. Like, that was never a problem. It was just purely how I felt internally about.
So can I ask you a question, just very, very out there?
Would you anything?
Well, I'd be grateful. Can I ask you then, would you say that you have defined yourself on a basis of what sort of man you would like to seek, or what sort of romantic company you'd like to seek?
Not completely, but I know that when I dress, I put makeup on, when I do my hair, that's a performed self. I'm existing. Like, there are different kinds. We've got a political self, we've got an internal self, I think, and we've got a perform. We like the idea of have you had the idea of code switching?
Yes, I'm code switching, tone switching, very well aware of, and I think that that's a very interesting idea. Again, when it comes down to it, I think you asked really interesting. You said, what is a woman, is a performative question. I think it's also a really important question, whether it's performative or not. And the reason I think it's really important is, if there is no such thing as women, what are people defining as? It's really important.
Well, there is a such thing as woman, but like if you ask a woman what is a woman, they have the same kind of, not sure what, unless you bring it down to absolute biology, where you're talking about the uterus. But that's.
But I don't think it has to be. I don't think it has to be uterus. There's women who have hysterectomies. I think that's one. That's one thing I will say. One thing I will say. I always laugh on Twitter when I get a few TRAs who go, "Well, I don't have I know women who've had hysterectomies who don't have. Are they not women?" I go, "No." I think what I would say, and I know that's not you. I'm just saying, I have seen that, and it does make me cackle with laughter. I think one of the biggest problems here is that when we're saying what is a woman, that I think that for me, and I'm going to say this very carefully, the only coherent way of defining womanhood is defining that as an individual who is adult, human, and female. That is my personal view. Now, I think. No, go ahead, Frida. Go ahead.
So when you say, but you see, when you look at the kind of cultural ideas of womanhood, like when you listen to Aretha Franklin sing "I Feel Like a Natural Woman," when Shaka Khan sings "I'm Every Woman," when Shania Twain sings "Man, I Feel Like a Woman," it's like, well, what are they talking about? And it's like, what they're talking about is something they want to embody. And I think that is something trans women want to embody. And it might seem completely ephemeral.
I would an ephemeral feminine energy is what I would describe it as.
Yeah.
I think the problem with that is, for example, does a little boy who thinks he wants to be a woman, does he become a woman? There's now the question. I personally don't think that's possible. However, can that little boy grow up to want to be feminine, want to express that in whatever way he chooses? Yeah, sure. I mean, absolutely. I totally accept that, and I think that that's really important. I think one of the biggest things that I've seen, Ms. Frida, and I want to expand on this with you because I think it'd be interesting from your experience that I'm so grateful for you bringing up, is that I've seen a lot of children who are coming out as trans or gay, saying that when they were younger, their parents wouldn't allow them to express themselves or play with certain toys or have especially young gay boys. They weren't allowed to have female friends. They weren't allowed to behave in a certain way. They were pressured into certain interests like sport, for example, or other interests. Now, my question to you, is, do you think that is inflicting a form of trauma on a lot of young gay, and I would say, these individuals? And I think it causes them a lot of serious harm, and I think it causes them a lot of serious issues because they're not being allowed to explore themselves. For example, I know actually, well, very funnily, one of my very close friends who at school was very feminine, wasn't gay, but was a very feminine boy, who has now gone on to become, a serious individual in the British military, in a very, very serious regiment, very, very good at what they do. But, at school, and particularly at younger ages as well, they said, I played with dolls. I played in doll houses. And now they're a very serious thing. Children do things and emulate, often especially as well, people who are brought up in single mothers or two-mother households often emulate their parents. They want to emulate their parents.
Yeah.
So my question really becomes, when you have individuals who are trying to emulate it and are forbidden from doing so or forbidden from exploring themselves, is that causing a lot of the trauma? Is that causing people to be so uncomfortable with who they are because they've not been allowed to explore who they are? They've not had that open upbringing.
I would say that is not inconceivable. I mean, surely that can happen. But from my perspective, I'm quite lucky, from in my family, I'm the youngest of 7, and I think by the time I was born, my mum and dad were probably like, whatever. But the thing is, but I knew when I came out to my dad always thought I was gay, and he just kind of accepted that. And my dad passed away recently, so
I'm sorry. I'm very sorry about that.
But he never got to really know me as Frida because. But the thing is, I was always worried about, because that would have been an intellectual leap for him. He could understand me being gay.
Okay.
But for me to come out as trans, because he knew I dressed as a girl, he knew I went out in Manchester, but it was always, for him, he always thought it was just performative.
A phase? Or was it a phase or was it performative?
Yeah, it wasn't a phase because I did it from when I was 16 to be, but like a bit of a drag queen. But he was always like, oh, whatever you want to do, as long as you don't get beaten up. But I think if I'd have said to him, I want to be a woman, because those words, they're very difficult to intellectualize, and he would have, I think he might not have understood that, and I can understand why he would not have understood that. Whereas my mom has always been like, my mom. I remember when I was really young, and I used to say to my mom, I want to be my sister. That was how I used to express it when I was young.
Mm-hmm.
And my mom would let me wear my sister's clothes, and she'd let me do all that, and then it was like, it was not a problem. But you see, the problem I have is, like, that's separate from being trans. Like, people can go through that and still be a gay man, and still be what is associated with drag queens, and so, because I know those men, and I respect them. Like, one of my friends in Manchester is Cheddar Gorgeous, who came second in RuPaul's Drag Race, and I respect those people because it's
Cheddar's incredible. I mean, you obviously know I probably disagree a lot on Cheddar. I know actually Cheddar through Cheddar's boyfriend is lovely. And, you know, they're very intelligent people, and I totally agree. I totally respect that. And I respect I think, to just kind of go into Cheddar, I think Cheddar has an element of really interesting gender non-conformity.
Oh, yeah.
But that's almost a total androgyny from a kind of bizarre kind of standpoint that's interesting.
She's very androgynous. I always say she, but it's not really she. But that's just because I know her as a...
Well, that's, you know, here and there.
But so what I was going to say was, like, one of the problems I had, because I was in that world, when I came out, surprisingly, a lot of the pushback came from gay men who said, "Oh, Frida, you're not a woman. You're a gay boy," you know, because I had sex with men, and they might have thought maybe I'm not gay because you know what I mean. It was like this kind of... So there was a bit of misogyny coming from gay men that I never experienced.
Well, I think it's really important that we say this right here and right now. I think if your identity is dependent on externalities and others in terms of what others think, I think it's pretty weak basis. And I think, you know, for someone saying, "Well, I'm not gay because I had sex with someone who's gone on to identify as trans," well, quite frankly, that's speaking on an insecurity of themselves. Because quite frankly, even from, you know, my position, you're male, they're male. You know, that doesn't, and even at the time you weren't identifying otherwise. So, you know, it's a really bizarre insecurity personally. I think that actually speaks more to something about, I would say, a deep ingrained level of prejudice against femininity. I think.
If I can just bring something else up now, it's like because we talked about, you know, the big name TERFs, which I call them the top table TERFs. Do you know what they're called?
Do you know what they're called? They're called head girls within the movement. Head girls.
Right. So the ones around the table with J.K. Rowling. So
yeah.
But there are people that are out there a bit more extreme, and I would say Kelly J. Keane is very much... See, they distance themselves from her a little bit because they recognize that there are right-wing factions that will latch on to her, and I'm going to put something to you, and maybe you'll
go for it.
But I think that this is a right-wing movement that has found a way in through women, and when the feminism... I don't know if Kelly J. King thinks herself a feminist, but they certainly use the rhetoric.
She doesn't. They
certainly use the rhetoric of feminism, like the idea of let women speak, you know, like as if they're kind of an oppressed minority there. But Kelly J. King is definitely using that, but she's co-opting that, but she doesn't really do anything for women. She's not doing anything for women on the ground. She's not helping any vulnerable women. She has a traveling circus that goes around into different towns where she knows she's going to get a reaction, and that when she gets that reaction, and recently in New York she ran away from that reaction. I'm saying this to you because I know you have spoken favorably of Kelly J. Keane, and that was one of the things that really bothered me about...
Okay, well, just to put that, you know, on the table, because, you know, I know before this we said, let's just be totally honest. You know, I count Kelly as a friend. I really actually admire Kelly for a lot of things. Now, I will tell you this: Kelly does an incredible amount of work in allowing women to come to feel empowered to be able to speak. She constantly and consistently offers women some of the most incredible support behind the scenes, and it's not always public. And she offers them financial support as well.
I can only comment on what I can see.
So. No, I agree. I'm not saying that you know, in any way have implied otherwise, but I just want to put that on the record that I actually genuinely really admire Kelly. I think what Kelly has done repeatedly is actually incredible. Now, regarding Kelly's kind of wider activism in the traveling circus, what I'd say about New York is, firstly, she was actually forbidden from going by the New York police, who said that they couldn't personally protect her. Now, I think that's very interesting. I think it's interesting to note that they couldn't protect her. So that implies there was that implies there was a threat against her.
No, it implies that she is the aggressor, and she doesn't.
I don't think it does.
No, she comes into town and sets her stall. So she doesn't need to be there.
How's that? I'm not sure how that's aggressive, and I don't necessarily
because her message.
But also, she doesn't need to be there. It's an interesting comment.
No, she doesn't need to make that statement, because the statement she's making is a trans exclusionary one. It's not a pro women one. That's my point.
But how is it not pro women to say let women speak?
Because all of her talking points, and when I have looked at her YouTube page, all of the things she says, she never mentions feminism or women unless it's through the lens of trans people.
Not sure that's true. I think actually Kelly has done a great deal of advocacy on surrogacy. And Kelly opposes surrogacy, and I also personally, I think she's absolutely right on it. I don't agree on that.
I mean, I'm not saying. I mean, nobody is a wholly horrible person, you know. But the problem with Kelly is, I mean, she has said some pretty, you know, she was advocating for, you know, people to arm themselves against trans women in toilets. She believes that, you know.
Well, I think I'd say that she did say arm, but she said that men should arm themselves and guard those in those areas in America.
What is the point of that? But
well, I mean, that's for Kelly. I mean, I'm not here to understand what Kelly said, and I don't want to put words in Kelly's mouth.
You did say that you respect her in.
I do. I still do. I think.
But I put it to you that she is a danger to people like me, because she's associated people like me to sexual predators, and that is
in what sense?
Because, well, if you look, I mean, I can't quote you directly, but I know on her YouTube
channel. No, I'm just going to take, you know, what did she say? Because I know I've seen actually, you know, Kelly deal with detransitioners. I've seen her deal with gay people.
We can get onto the detransitioners because we know why they're boosted by certain Daily Mail journalists and the LGBA. But can we just?
Let's focus on this.
I had to talk about Kelly J because she was one of the reasons that I got into reporting her to the police, and I did report her to the police. And the reason I did was because a friend of mine, a drag queen, was called a groomer for doing a drag queen story time, and this person was wearing an adult female t-shirt, and I know there's only one source for that. And I don't, and I worry that.
So can I just ask you, was Kelly J keen calling this person a groomer directly, or was it someone wearing her?
No, Kelly J King wasn't calling this individual.
No, okay. I'm just trying to work it out. But
she has commented on the drag queen story time on her personal YouTube page, and I know that she sells these T-shirts with adult human female on, and I made that connection. Now, Kelly J. Keane has not directly hurt anybody, right? That's not what I'm saying, but she's emboldening a rhetoric that is going to get somebody hurt, and that's why I reported it.
I mean, I just the question I have for you on a genuine note is, say someone assaults someone with a shirt that has Coca-Cola or something else on it, or another sort of political philosophy. You know, there were people who were screaming some horrible things, for example, about Jewish people outside Labour HQ, and they were wearing Jeremy Corbyn T-shirts. Now, I don't want to go down that whole road, but what I do want to say is, was Jeremy Corbyn responsible to a level that you would call the police on him for those?
Well,
no.
If Jeremy Corbyn had a little YouTube channel where he actually talked about these drag queen storytime events, and then he encouraged people to hate trans women as by proxy, it's like there is a connection there, and it's a very, I'll admit it's a tenuous one, but it's something I'm worried about, because
I think fundamentally we have to be worried about. This is what I'll tell you I'm very worried about. I personally disagree with drag queen story hour, but I'm not going to go and threaten people.
It feeds into this whole libs of TikTok kind of thing, you know, where
I don't actually. Can I be honest? Because I think we need to clear this up. Just personally, from my perspective, I like libs of TikTok because I think libs of TikTok just simply post unedited the content itself. I don't have a problem with that. My problem. Here's what my problem comes. I think when you start having individuals going into schools and doing drag queen story hour, I think it is questionable. I think it's really suspect, if I'm being totally honest. And I'll tell you this now.
But what is it you fear that was going to happen?
It's not that I fear. I think it's inappropriate. I think So here, Frida, on this basis, would you allow? I actually asked this of. It was a question I asked of one of the individuals who was the head of providing for a certain company that I'll leave anonymous. I asked them this. I said, "Would you allow a woman to wear the clothes that some of these drag queens are wearing, reading to children?" And the answer was, "Well, no." And I said, "Well, that's very interesting. You're saying, therefore, that because a man wears that outfit, he can read to children, but a woman would not be able to." So, firstly, up, that's just straight up sex. That's sex discrimination.
I would say, I mean, I'm not, here to defend anybody, but the thing is, I have seen videos where I thought, oh, that's a bit fucking weird. Do you know what I mean? Like where it is.
Is this the drag queens?
Yeah, and I thought that is, because I've seen, but I'm sort of, is this real? Is this real? Is this there to wind? But I feel like it's there to wind up a certain kind of people. The reason,
yeah, but the danger is, I agree with you, and I think that what's happening is these people are coming back. Because I remember seeing, I don't know if you saw that one where it had the sign saying it's not going to lick itself.
No, I didn't see that one. But
that's America. That's America, to be completely fair. But what I will say is that I don't think drag belongs in your children. Now, I have friends who are drag queens too. I personally have, issues with drag, ethically, but it's their choice. They do what they do. What I find interesting is all of them have told me I wouldn't go near kids. My drag is an art form because it's about emulating secondary sex stereotypes, and characteristics. So therefore, what they tell me constantly is drag does not belong around children. I agree with them. Drag is an adult.
I wouldn't say, the thing is, like when I used to do drag and stuff, and I'd do pride events and I'd be out during the day, children they think you're a Disney princess. They it's not a sexual thing. It's nothing sexual about. I can see in some of those videos there may be something, it's like that Balenciaga saga that
God.
So there is some kind of merge of art and kind of, I don't know what it is, but I'm not judging that. But when drag queens in of themselves are not sexual, you know what I mean? If you're seeing sex,
can I disagree with that? And can I say why I disagrei with that? I think inherently there is something about essentially mimicking secondary sex characteristics of the opposite sex.
Okay, well, I'm not here to convince you. No,
I agree, and I accept where you're coming from as well. I think the problem here is
go on, I'll let you. Sorry,
just very briefly. I think the problem here is this is what I'm going to call an open goal for people and movements to come in, and I'm talking about Proud Boys and real far right.
Yeah,
I'm talking about the really nasty sorts. These people are going to come in because this is what I call a free win, and I'm going to be very blatantly honest about the states of both movements. In the UK, GC is an ascendancy. In the US, it's starting to go on the ascendancy. If we're calling it GC, that sort of view is on the ascendancy. TRA, or whatever you're wanting to call it, trans rights activism, is not in the ascendancy anymore. That's just a kind of blunt, stating the obvious, this is what the situation is. There are groups now that look at this and go, this is a very good cause for us to radicalize people because certain groups have not talked about it. They are jumping on this because they know it's an easy way to win, because it is GC is in that traction ascendancy. The thing is, does everyone who agrees with that position morally contaminated because there are people who hold that position who are very bad people? I would argue no, in the same way I don't contaminate. But I think that's a real problem. I think what has to be said, though, is that these people, another great example of this is Matt Walsh. I personally find a lot of what Matt Walsh says ridiculous, and actually, I don't actually think he has an understanding of the topic. Because the other day,
he's a very sort of religious. Well, he says he's religious. I think he's coming at it from
he is religious, but
authoritarian kind of.
No, I think he's religious. I think he's religious in the way that he loves the sin and hates the sinner, rather than love the sinner, hate the sin.
The problem I have, right, is like we started this by talking about Kelly J. Keane, and the reason I brought that up is because she's bringing these topics in, and the reason, like you've said, is because the far right do find a way in, and when Kelly goes on to these programs like Tucker Carlson and things like that, the reason she's invited and amplified by these people is because that's what she talks about, and she's by proxy associating she's associating trans women like me with that, and And it's like, well, we can all find abhorrent trans people. If you search the internet for trans people that are doing something nasty or something you disagree with, you'll find it. But it's like, it's a weaponized argument, and it's the way that
I agree. So I think that what you have to do is look at the statistics.
And another problem I have with it is it's a very, very simple narrative, and I've looked at the YouTube channel of Kelly J. Keane, and I've seen the comment box, and I've been absolutely disgusted by some of the things people are saying there, because they are not thinking about them like helping women. They're not thinking about let women speak. They're talking about hurting trans people. I'm not going to quote anything specifically, but that's just something
I can imagine there are maybe Robbie, a few people, but that's not Kelly's Robbie, responsibility. I don't think. I don't think Kelly's responsible for comments on on a live stream, for example.
But I do, because I think she emboldens it, because she never calls it out. And it was the same thing when I went into your chat space, because the first chat space I went into, I think you were talking about the LGBT Alliance being investigated for, and fair enough, the Charity Commission and all that are going to investigate. But within that are people that they just hate trans people. You've got to admit that, Robbie. And when you don't call that out, when you don't, if there needs to be a separate organization for people that don't think trans are part, fine, they can have that organization. But they don't just want that. They want to take it a step further and say that somebody like me is completely delusional and I'm actually a gay man and I should just get over it. And that is their attitude.
Well, I don't think that's entire. I am not here to comment on other people. It's not my role. It's not my job.
But what I'm.
But what I do is I certainly think on this topic, I think that the organization that has been founded, because what people are saying is we have sex-based rights. We have sex-based rights that are fundamentally based on our rights to same-sex attraction.
See, the thing is with sex-based rights, they don't protect, like, in society. It's not like it. Sex-based rights is something that you've only seen as a phrase in the last few years. And it's because of lobby groups like this. And they are a lobby group. They're not a charity. They're a lobby group that are going in, trying to make inroads into the government and to try and change laws, right? And if they
I think that's Stonewall and Mermaids as well. Then they're lobby groups as well.
Yeah, but they're not trying to hurt anybody.
Well, I think that depends on what you mean by. Certainly, let's not go down the mermaid road. But I think it depends on your beliefs. I think we have to be very careful. We have to be careful with defining charities in such a way.
You see, when I came out, I will admit to you, I never thought about this stuff, and it was only when I started to identify as trans that I started to notice this stuff, right? And I thought, well, at first I had sympathy with it because I started to listen to Magdalene Burns, and I thought, yeah, I can understand how some women don't, they don't get it, but it's the venom of it that it's like, I don't want to talk about somebody that's deceased, I don't want to say anything bad about, they can't speak for themselves now, but it was the venom. And it was like, well, you're just looking at things, you're trying to find things on the internet that wind you up and then make a video about it.
I think it was very real. I knew Magdalene personally, a wonderful woman, very, very, very forthright and very brave.
I think she was great. You know what? I think she was. I don't agree with her, but when she was on YouTube, I think she had a great, She
was the exact same in real life, by the way. But she was very much like this. What I would say to you is, for a lot of lesbian women, they're going on dating apps and being told they have to accept these people. They have to accept that they're women. They're having to accept these people in their spaces. That they have to say this and accept that. Well, I'm taking the testimony from about hundreds of lesbians I've heard now, and I think the thing here really does become, and I think it's really important, about sex is really important to same-sex attracted people. And I think I agree with you. It's not something that has been long known as sex-based rights, but they do exist, and the basis of them is sex, same-sex marriage. That's obviously based on sex. It's the same-sex marriage bill. For example, bear in mind, Stonewall, up until 2012, was calling itself an organization for same-sex attracted people.
Yeah,
which
but Stonewall. I mean, Stonewall's a massive organization, and I'm the
no,
first.
I agree.
I'm
I
the
agree, but
first to
that's what they were calling themselves.
I'm the first to criticize any organization that is like, bloated and full of
Well, I mean, but the thing
bureaucracy.
is, that wasn't even necessarily a criticism from me, because I think that that's what Stonewall was saying up until 2012. We are a same-sex organization. We're a same-sex rights attracted
Okay. Well,
organization, and that was the language they were using. Because bear in mind, at that time, sex
right.
was, just people didn't think about same-sex based rights or sex-based rights because people just took them for granted.
So we've covered quite a lot there, and we've talked about a lot of things we probably could have delved into a lot deeper, but it's like, what do you see as because I don't want to keep having these arguments, and I don't want to keep falling out with people who I don't know, and I don't want to be the TRA, and I want to understand if there is a genuine kind of, argument to be made about single sex spaces, about sports. I understand those. But the problem I have is there are a lot of people who think they're kind of like lazy thinking, and they'll latch on to people like Helen Joyce and sorry to keep mentioning her, but Julie Bindel. But I in a longer timeline, I can't see this. I can see the energy running out of it. It's like when the star comes to the end of its life, it's going to just blow up or just fizzle out. And what I want to find out is if there is an outcome, if there is some kind of reconciliation, where is it going to come from? Like, is it going to be political? Is it going to be,
Well, I think this is really,
it going to be philosophical, or?
I think it's a great note to end on, really, to discuss that, because where is this going is so important. And I think that when we're looking at where is this going, we have to look at threefold. I think I'm just going to be honest and say I think that politically we are heading to a place in which we're going to end up where trans people are protected in law from discrimination, which I'm going to say now, that method could go two ways. It can remain in current, but I think gender reassignment is going to have to change because it's too brittle. It doesn't necessarily cover individuals who are not seeking gender reassignment. So therefore, you've got a situation there. It's going to have to be sex stereotype, so that would be under the characteristic of sex or sexuality based. So that would be people protected under the Equalities Act for their sex. So say, for example, you said to me, or discriminated against me because I look somehow different to what you expect me to be for my sex discrimination. Then again, on sexuality, if it was something related to sexuality, for example, you would protect on such a basis. So I think that's where that could go. It could just go, but gender reassignment, and put it this way, I'm just going to be blatantly honest with you, the GRA is not fit for purpose. Everyone knows that. Everyone on every side hates the GRA. They want the GRA gone, or replaced on one side, not on the other. I mean, I'm going to be blatantly honest. I think we should repeal the GRA because I think that actually the GRA is completely incoherent and inconsistent with legislation like the Equalities Act. And I think, for example, people don't know this, but for example, and I'll bring this up now, Schedule 3, paragraph 28 of the Equalities Act allows people to just completely disregard a GRC regarding single-sex spaces and provision of single-sex spaces. So essentially, does a GRC count? Well, if you can't inquire about a GRC, obviously, then you are essentially playing Russian roulette, which legally doesn't really work. So essentially, the legislation needs to be clarified. There's a great deal of bad law on this, and it can go two ways. I am going to say now that I think the Labour Party is starting to swing. I think Keir Starmer, no, but I think the rest of the Labour Party are starting to swing against this. I certainly know that Eddie Izzard at his selection in Hustings in Sheffield had a very hard time. And I think that there's a great deal of people who are deeply now ambivalent and are now fundamentally against this in many ways in terms of the current status quo. Put it this way, I think you know this as well. Status quo can't hold. Status quo as it is cannot hold.
I think there are certain arguments that have been weaponized, and the self-ID one is definitely one of them. And I think it's.
But self-ID is toxic. Self-ID is totally toxic.
It's been used for political leverage, especially in Scotland at the moment. And as far as I'm concerned, I just want people to understand that trans people are not your enemy, and we are just trying to navigate political situations. We're trying to navigate social situations. And, it might seem to you like there's a really angry contingent of TRAs all the time and blocking people and trying to get people banned, but it's because we recognize that a lot of it is coming from a bad place. Like people like Sarah Fillmore, people like Harry Miller, they don't care about progressive politics. They don't care about helping anybody. It's a very much selfish kind of world that they live in, as far as I'm concerned. And a lot of the people I've, read and people I've followed through looking at your chat spaces, they're very single issue people. They're very dogmatic in their approach, and I find that really.
But I think this is one of the issues, though, is that they've become single issue because they've been told they can't talk about it, and they've been told they're not allowed to speak.
But you can talk. You can talk about it, but you can't have this kind of. You can't use all these dog whistles all the time, like keep prison single sex when you have no.
I don't think that's a dog. I personally disagree. I don't think that's a dog whistle. I agree with it. I personally agree with it. Yeah,
I think most people kind of like understand why you have to safeguard people in prisons, but you understand also that these arguments are used to hurt trans people. They're not used to help prisoners.
But I think regardless of that, they're actually used to protect. And they're more, again, why people are using arguments is something that is in some ways also academic, because I actually want to look at the real argument and the real data. And I want to look at the actual impacts in the argument itself. So, for example, the worst person in the world can make a really good point. I've had to concede that multiple times.
I'm not.
But this is the thing. This is the thing. We have to look at arguments as they stand. And I'm afraid, I think, regarding hospitals, regarding prisons, and regarding schools, I think that the argument is fundamentally pro-safeguarding. I think it's incredibly strong, and I think that we have to be careful about that.
But you've got to also remember that trans people in society at large are not a problem. What is the problem is systemic misogyny. And I feel like this isn't being addressed because people are looking the wrong way. I was on GB News last week.
I watched it with Lisa Townsend. I thought it was fascinating because Lisa Townsend has a totally different position to me. She says that it's on a case-by-case basis. I totally disagree with Lisa on that. I like Lisa quite a bit, but I totally disagree with her. I think that it shouldn't be on a case-by-case basis.
She's not doing the job she was paid to do.
But she is. She's representing the concerns.
No, she's representing.
She was elected to represent.
Robbie, I'm not going to. She's representing the LGB Alliance.
We're not going to agree on that one because she's been elected.
I think we've covered a lot of stuff there, and I think I didn't want to get into any arguments too much. So I think we managed not to fall out with each other.
No, we didn't, and I think it's been good.
And obviously, I disagree with you and on some issues, but
it's mutual.
But I know, but I think the problem I have, and the problem I continue to have, is on Twitter. The debate is toxic, and it's not helping anybody. And the reason I'm trying to do these podcasts and things is to talk to people who do have different views to me, because I think the only way to get through this really is to kind of talk to each other. And I'm not saying I'm always I'm very irreverent on Twitter, and I refer to myself as a transgender lesbian sperm producing female. And I write in that way because I find the whole thing sometimes amuses me from a philosophical point of view. But I can understand why people have a problem with me, and I know because I have a problem with you, but I don't know, where do we go from here?
Well, I think we keep having these conversations. I'll give you credit where credit is due. You've sat down with me, you've had this talk. It's been an honest conversation where we both express views that I totally disagree. I totally disagree with you on many bases. But I think that we've been able to have this discussion. It's good because people can actually watch this. They can make up their mind whatever side they're on. They can, and actually, there will be people who agree with me in certain parts and agree with you in other parts. That's the nature of things.
Well, so I'd like to think though that there are people who follow you who would look at this and maybe, oh well, maybe Frida's got a point there. I mean, she talks
Yeah.
rubbish. She talks rubbish there, and completely nutcase. But maybe you know what I mean.
And then meanwhile, I'll have people in my inboxes over all the factional stuff on the other side going, "You didn't defend. You didn't say this about."
Yeah,
No,
I'm going to get that too. I know I'm going to. But Robbie,
no, don't worry.
Robbie, thank you for your time. And
It's been a pleasure.
And hopefully we'll chat again in future.
Yeah,
Okay.
do this again soon.
Thank you.